Hello there, welcome to lesson number 6 in our series on using FluidDesigner for 3D printing to create ceramic and porcelain objects. In today's lesson we're going to show you how you can use a built-in tool within FluidDesigner to create a gear tooth shaped vase. So if you actually start FluidDesigner up, today's lesson we're going to do ceramic and porcelain projects, so we need to go to Learning Projects, Ceramic and Porcelain, and it's lesson 06 and it's the Cogwheel vase. So this is the object we're actually going to create in today's lesson. If I just zoom around it, you'll see there's a base at the bottom. It's quite an unusual shape for a vase, but what we want to do today is to just demonstrate some of the built-in functions in FluidDesigner which enable you to create this sort of object quite easily. So I'm just going to start the Screencast keys. So any key presses I make, like A, B, C, will be displayed in the lower corner of the window here. And just remind you that the help instructions here, you can follow those to work through this lesson without bothering to watch the whole of the video. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to add a curve and use curves galore. So if you go to Add, Curve and Curves Galore, this little panel will open up here. Now you can't see anything at the moment because the initial object is quite small, so if we go to View and zoom to Selected, this is the default object, which is a profile, and it's profile type 1. Now this window here allows you to change certain factors, certain variables for the object that's displayed, and you can change the values here and get different sorts of shapes. So there's a lot of functionality in these objects, and they're very similar to lessons 1 to 3, where we showed you creating simple vases using Bezier curves and Bezier circles, and you'll notice that we've got Bezier listed here as well as other types of curve. So this is using similar sorts of technology as lessons 1 to 3. But we're not going to do the profile one in today's lesson. We're going to need to change this to the cogwheel type. Now, as you can see, there are lots of others, and once you've learned how to use one, you can really just play around with the others to come up with all sorts of shapes. So here's our initial object, and if we just show the main information icon, you can see that this object is pretty small at the moment. It's actually only a couple of millimeters across. It's a very tiny object, the default size. So we do need to make it much bigger, but we've got various factors here that we can change. First thing we're going to see how to change is the teeth. Well, it's pretty straightforward, the number of teeth. If we click on here, we can reduce the number of teeth. Smallest number is going to be 2, so you could create a vase which has got that sort of cross-sectional base, or a triangular one. We're going to use this 4-sided one. So that's the number of teeth. That's pretty straightforward. The next thing we're going to change is the bevel. Now this line here constitutes the bevel on the object. If we set this bevel value back to 0, you'll see we've got a very square tooth. If we set it up to 1, the bevel now, this is the bevel. What it means is we've moved from here 0 to the center line of 1. In other words, 1 means a complete bevel, because this bevel meets the bevel on the other side. And I'll just drag that with the mouse to show you it changing. So as you change the number, you change the bevel. So you can set whatever value you want there. We're going to set it to 1 in this instance. So that's one of the variables. Now the next thing is the inner radius. Now we want an inner radius of 50 and not 0.5. But if I click on this one, you'll see that the inside of this object, the inner radius is changing. And we want a value of 50, so I'm going to enter in 50 and we'll see what happens. That inner radius now has gone beyond the outer radius and the middle radius because it's such a high value. Okay, so there's our inner radius now. We now need a middle radius of 95. Well, I'm going to try dragging this with the mouse and we'll see what happens to our shape. Okay, so you can see it deforming the shape. So if you hold the mouse button down and drag, you can see visually how the object is going to appear and how it's going to change, and then you can stop at a value that suits you. You don't have to type in 90, but I'm going to do it in this instance. And we'll do the same thing with the outer radius. We need to have a value of 100, but I'm going to drag it and you can see what's happening. The outer radius, once it gets to 50, it will meet the inner radius, and then eventually the outer radius will exceed the inner radius, and again it's just changing the shape. And we'll just take it up to 100. That's the value we're going to have in this instance, in this lesson. And as you can see, that shape now is like it was at the beginning, pretty much like it was at the beginning. It's just much larger, and if we look at the information icon, you can see that this now is 200 millimeters across, 20 centimeters, and it reflects the finished item at the bottom there. Okay, so that's set up the profile, the outline of this particular object. But there's a couple of other things that we need to change. Because this is a curve, we're going to actually use the Bezier type of curve. And instead of 2D, we're going to switch to 3D. Now, if we look at the diagram, if we look at the object here at the moment, it's grey. It's got grey on the inside, which means it would be solid and filled on the inside. When we switch to 3D, the grey disappears. So what we're doing is, with 3D, our curve, our object, is just the yellow line around the outside, just the profile. If we use 2D, the object is the grey area in the middle as well. Well, we just want the outline in our case. And then the other options are vector and auto, and if you've done one of the earlier lessons, you'll see the difference between vector and auto, and you can see it on the screen. Vector gives you very straight edges, auto gives you curves. So you could have a curved shape here. We, however, are going to leave it as vector, because we want this kind of angular appearance for our finished object here. So what we've got now is just this profile around the outside. Now, once we're happy with all these settings, we can confirm it, and we always do that in FluidDesigner by going to Tools, Objects, and converting it to a mesh. Now what we need to do is we need to give this object some height, and we do. Oh, I can close this panel down actually. We don't need to use that anymore. So we need to give this object some height, and the way we do that is we're going to use the Extrude command. Extrude. And before we can do that, we need to go into edit mode. So if we press the tab key on the keyboard switches us into edit mode, and we can see that at the top screen here. And at the moment, this object is the object that we're using, but it's not highlighted so that we can edit it in, change it in edit mode. So what we need to do is we also need to press A on the keyboard to select all the points around this this object. So A will deselect the point. The object is selected, but the points are not selected when we're not in yellow. So we want A to select all of the points. And now what we're going to do is we're going to perform an extrude on this object. So we press E on the keyboard to extrude, and when we move the mouse, you can see what we get are new faces, which we can go up or we can extrude down. Yeah. And what we need to do, however, is we just want to extrude vertically upwards. And if you look in this panel here, you can see the X, Y and Z values are all changing. Similarly, up in the window at the top, you can see DX, DY and DZ are all changing. What we want to do is to restrict it to just the vertical. Well, if you look down here, the blue line is the vertical, and that's the Z direction. The green line Y is the Y direction, and the red line is the X direction. We want to restrict it to just going upwards. So if we press the Z key on the keyboard, what we're doing is we are restricting this, and it doesn't matter what I do with the mouse going left or right, I am tied into going vertically upwards now. Now we want a height of about 150 mils, so there we are, that's 150 mils, and then once I've got the height that I want, I can press the left mouse button. So we've extruded our object vertically now. The next thing we need to do, as you've probably seen in previous exercises on vases, we need to add a base to this object. So I'm just going to deselect things at the moment and just zoom in. and we want to highlight the edge all the way around the bottom of this object and fill it in with a face. And we can do that by clicking the right mouse button and changing selection mode to Edge Select. And if we just select here one edge, we'd have to keep going round and select all of them, holding down the Shift key. But there's a quick way of doing that, and that is if we hold down the Alt key and press, you'll see that there's a yellow line appears all the way around the bottom of this now. I'll just deselect it with the A key. You can see it's not selected there at the moment. If I hold down the Alt key and point at the edge at the bottom, I've selected the whole of the bottom of this object, and what I can do now is to press the F key on the keyboard to add a face to the bottom of this object. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see that with the grid being there, but if I just come out of edit mode, and if I just point at the blue arrow there and just move the object up, you can see that there is definitely now a face on the bottom of this object. And if I just go to edit and undo, that will just put it back down on the grid. Okay, so that just demonstrates that there is a face in the object. The next thing we need to do is to solidify this object. These faces at the moment don't have any, these walls don't have any thickness at the moment, and so what we need to do is to add a modifier. So it's the tool, it's the spanner tool in the properties window here. If we add a modifier, we want to add a solidify modifier to this, and as you've probably seen in earlier lessons, we need to change the thickness, and if I just zoom in here, you'll see it changing. So if we do 1 millimeter, 2, 3 and 4, and as previously you might have seen that we can change the offset in or out from the origin of the shell. Not too worried about whether I go in or out in this case. 4 millimeters is probably suitable for a vase if you're going to print a ceramic object. So we're going to leave it as that. So there's our gear vase created. To confirm this, however, we should always go to Tools, Object Tools, and convert it to a mesh. And so there's our finished object now. What we need to do is to delete this one at the bottom, the original, so highlight it and press X on the keyboard and then delete it. We now need to save the one that we've created in today's lesson, so we just go to File, and as is usual, we always go to Save As. Don't save it in the Learning Projects folder, leave those files there. Just go up the menu system and go to My Projects, Ceramic and Porcelain Projects, and save lesson 06, the Cogwheel vase, as a Blender file. So that's the object you've created today. We can't print Blender files, so as is normal, we always suggest you go to File and export it as a wavefront object. And we always like to save these objects to the desktop. So it's 06 Cogwheel vase object, so we export that to the desktop. And again, we always recommend that you go to Netfab Basic and run a check on this object. So if you go to Project and Open, go to Desktop, open the Cogwheel vase object file, and as you can see, there are some problems with this file. We don't seem to have a base. I don't know what's gone on there. That's very strange. All right, let's run the repair part and just move that across and update it and run the automatic repair and execute it. Okay, so we've got all zeros there, that's fine. Okay, that's looking a little bit better now. So Netfab's identified the fact that there should be a base along the bottom there. Not quite sure what was happening at the beginning. We've just got one shell, we've got no border edges, no orientation, no holes, so we can click Apply Repair. And Netfab's done its job. We've got no error message now. Not quite sure what happened there. It looked like there was no base, but anyway, Netfab's found it, put it back in. Really quite amazing tool is this Netfab. So you can now save this one. So you go to Parts and export it as a wavefront object. Save it to the desktop. Netfab will just add the little bit of text repaired there, and you save that object file, and that's your printable file now. So there's your gear vase created in FluidDesigner. Thank you.